Okay, thank you for being here, and let's get to business. And, oops, that's the first slide. Okay, what design can do. I want to take you to a journey to what that designing out crime thing means and the kind of projects that we do there. But first, I actually want to step back a little bit. So my second degree is in philosophy, so I have to step back from the world all the time and look at, okay, what design can do, but why would people actually be interested in what design can do? And what is actually crucial in the broad fields of design that we have to be transported to other fields and be very useful there? And then when you look at the world and you click the button, you see that lots of governments, institutions, organizations, companies struggle with new kinds of problems. Problems that are much more open, much more complex, dynamic, and networked than they used to be. And they're open, which means that they've got lots of elements. They're complex, which means that these elements are all connected and there's connections between the connections. So you can't isolate a little part of a problem, you have to take it as a whole. It's dynamic. You can't actually shut yourself up in a room and say, okay, if the world could just stop now, I can think about it. And then I can think of an intervention and I'll be ready with the answer in 3 years. It doesn't work like that. And they're very networked, which also means that not only are the problems in society connected to each other, because we are so very connected to each other now, but also possibly the solutions will also be connected. So you can't solve these things in isolation. And a lot of the things that you see in the press, a lot of the things that you see happening in the world have to do with these new kinds of problems. And people find that very hard. And people have been looking at design as a possible answer because designers have been sort of dealing with open, complex, dynamic and networked situations all the time. So they built up a lot of professional knowledge that's potentially useful on a much larger scale. Companies, governments have realized that, and I think a lot of us have done projects that actually address these kind of things in the last years. And then about 8 years ago, a friend of mine, Bruce Nussbaum, wrote this paper in Business Week calling that design thinking and launching that into the business community. And it's become an immensely important subject for them, which, I mean, I've been doing research into how designers think for about 15 years now. So I thought that's really good news. And it's also recognition for us as a sector about the things that we can bring to a broader arena than we usually have. But I've done my tour of the business schools and found out that what they think is design thinking has to do with you sit in a room with lots of people, you call that multidisciplinary, and you use lots of post-its and you've got lots of ideas somehow. And so let's say the designer as the basically randomly generating creative idiot. And it doesn't go much deeper than that. And let's just think, okay, we've got this great opportunity now that sort of the word is out that design can do something. But what is it actually that design can do? And it's much more than the kind of things that are being picked up so widely now. And I think that's where we as a design sector have to say, okay, hold on. This is what we actually think we can bring. And those are the kind of discussions that I'd like to spark here on this day. So it's still a big question mark what design can do. And it's still a big question mark, okay, what do we actually see as the value that we can bring beyond the design sector? And I'd say let's learn from the experts. If you see what's being picked up around the world under this flag of design thinking, lots of the stuff is the kind of things that we sort of tell our first year students. And you think, that's not the best that we have, actually. And if you want to learn from a sector, if you really want to sort of see what a sector is thinking on its deepest level, you have to talk to the experts. So I've been studying expert design behavior for a very long time, which is absolute fun, because it makes you fly around the world, talk to people that are really good at their job, and asking them how they do these kind of things. And trying to find patterns, really trying to say, okay, what are they actually doing? And one of the things that you find, which is surprising to others, but probably not to this audience, is that they concentrate on the problem quite a bit. And generating solutions is not hard. It's not seen as something that is very special. But finding new approaches to problems is absolutely crucial. That's what they spend a lot of time on. That's what they've developed their own ways of thinking for. So while design is superficially always associated with, oh, designers create great solutions and they can draw and it's all very nice, maybe there's a lot of design knowledge on a high level, on a strategic level, that has to do with how you approach problems. And this is a quote from Einstein, who says that a problem can never be solved in the context in which it arose, which is, it's a very clever thing to say, and it's also a very stupid thing to say, because if you could actually solve something in the context in which it arose, you would probably never call it a problem. You'd just do it, basically. But it is true that a lot of the problems that we have in society and a lot of the problems that organizations are up against, we are sort of stuck. We don't know how to progress from that. And you need to create new frames. You need to create new approaches to these so very stuck problems. And I've been looking at these patterns of design behavior of these expert designers, trying to learn from them as much as I can, and doing experimental projects here in Holland and sort of around Europe mostly, and thinking, okay, I can sort of see a general pattern it sort of looks like this. And I won't go into any detail, but okay, first you have to have an archaeology of the problem. You have to have an understanding, where does the problem come from, actually. Then you need to get a sense of, okay, what is the central paradox? What makes this really hard to solve? And actually, to my surprise, when I studied these designers, they spent quite a bit of time really sort of getting to the crux of, okay, this is the paradox, this is what makes it hard. And then they just let that go. They go, okay, so that's not a way towards a solution. And then what they start to do, they start to zoom out, go to a broader arena of stakeholders. They actually go to the whole world, more or less. They do an analysis which, in philosophy, you would call a phenomenological analysis, and come up with themes. So from this whole wider problem arena that they've created, they start to find patterns in that and say, okay, these different parties more or less all want the same thing. They express themselves differently, but there's a theme behind there that I can use. And from these themes, they start creating frames as new approaches to problems. And they start trying them out. Okay, if I have this frame, would that be fruitful? And would that really work towards more solutions, or is it a kind of a dead end and, okay, let's not go there? So they start creating these futures, thinking ahead and thinking back, and trying out different directions in a very, very deliberate and exploratory way. So there's no brainstorming in these kind of things. There is actually, it's a very deliberate, explorative process. I've always been sort of impressed by sort of these top designers. They're all analytically very strong people. They're also creative, yep. They're not creative idiots that can't think. They're actually creative idiots that can think. Because you need that to actually sort of have this motion in the process of proposing things and looking at them critically. They then look at what kind of transformation is needed in all the organizations that are possibly engaged with these solutions. Is this possible, or is this too big a leap? Or is there one organization in there that's critical? And then they look at, how can I connect this, actually, what I've learned from this particular project to the broader arena, to other things in the world. And there's much more to it than this, but this is kind of a general pattern that I've been finding. And if you want to experience part of that pattern, we're doing a breakout session at 11:30 that gets you through a couple of these stages, the core of the process. And sort of think, okay, I know this pattern, I can sort of understand why people do that. It also resonates with my own design practice. The good projects actually sort of work more or less in this way. But then I don't want to come up with just, say, a theoretical idea. I need to experiment. I really want to sort of try this out. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to set up experiments that are big enough, and I can say, okay, I really trust this now, that this is a pattern that is useful and that is actually worth telling other people about. And it doesn't just work for me, it also works for other people. And looking for an arena to experiment in, I sort of ended up in Australia. And I ended up doing things about safety in public spaces. And that's called Designing Out Crime. I'm director of a center there, which is sponsored by the Ministry of Justice and the police and other people. And I think it's an interesting arena for us as designers. And it was an interesting arena for me, because crime is actually a symptom of things that are wrong in society. And it's also very much connected to fear. And it's sort of interesting, because if you sort of look at a symptom and you get the freedom to go back all the way to the causes, you start doing really cool projects in neighborhoods to help people. And the kind of projects that you would have a very hard time getting money for, but there's always money for fear, because we have troubles in society. And I'm working with Hans Boutelier from the Verwij Jonker Institute, and one of the things that he says in one of his books is, okay, more than 50% of the news that we get, in whatever medium, is actually connected to safety somehow. It's a huge issue in society. And we don't seem to be able to deal with it very well, because confronted with unsafety or coming from a feeling of fear, there's two things that you can do. You can actually hide. You can sort of shut yourself up in your home and buy sandbags and do all kind of countermeasures. That sort of works. Or you can be completely open and you can make sure that everybody's your friend, and then you're socially safe completely. Now, the hiding is a lot of what we do, actually, and it's not very productive because you get into problems of, say, loneliness. You're actually disconnecting yourself from the world. And spatially, you're actually abandoning public spaces completely because, well, we've got gated communities and we don't want to use public space at all, except for drive through it very fast. So that's not a very realistic option. Openness is also not very realistic because we live in very complex societies, in very complex cities, and you can't be everybody's friend. It's just plain impossible. So there is a real problem there, and what you see is that the discussions that we have in society actually oscillate between these two extremes. And there seems to be very little in the middle. And the left side leads to countermeasures, so putting up signs that people should, sort of basically warning signs and putting up fences. And the right side leads to an incredible amount of well-meant projects to connect people, but you can never be connected enough, in a sense. What I've been looking at, wait a minute, in these kind of paradoxes, design may be a third way of actually approaching them. And let's investigate that. We did a project in this area in Sydney. It's called King's Cross. And King's Cross is the area where young people like to go out. And it means that on a Friday night or a Saturday night, there's about 30,000 youngsters there, basically in one street, and a little side street. And there's clubs there, bars, etc. Every city has an area like this. And there's a bit of drugs there, sort of late at night. There's a lot of drunkenness. There always is a bit of violence. It's not a good sight. And the City of City has been trying to sort of do all kinds of things to help this, this area. So they've sort of done all the useful things of, okay, they've cleaned it up. They've sort of put different kinds of park benches there. They're all the things that a city can. They've literally sort of hung flower pots in the lanterns. And so they've done all their usual things. And the police, they've actually built a police station in the middle of the area, which spoils the atmosphere quite a bit. And there's a lot of police around, etc. But still, it all sort of, everything that happens remains at that same level. And then they called us in saying, well, we actually can't move on from where we are now. We can't hire even more police. We can't sort of force clubs to hire even more security personnel. So what do? So we just went in there with designers and students and everybody and hang out and interviewed people and talked to people. And we came up with this, okay, so the old frame is, this is a criminal problem. And what would a useful new frame be? Well, one of the things that we tried out and turned out to be useful was saying, okay, 30,000 youngsters trying to have a good time. I mean, they're not criminals. They're youngsters trying to have a good time. It's just they're not very successful at it. 30,000 youngsters trying to have a good time, that's comparable to a music festival. What would you organize if you organized a music festival? Well, for instance, you would make sure that people could get there and that people could get away. Now, the peak of young people coming into this area is 1 o'clock at night, and the last train leaves at 1:20. So people are basically stuck there. You can take a taxi, but taxis are expensive, and the taxi queue can be a couple of hours long, and if you're too drunk, the taxi doesn't take you anyway. Okay, there's a problem there. Also, quite physically, if you would organize a music festival, you'd make sure that you would have more than 3 public toilets, one of which is at the police station, so people don't tend to go there. You'd make sure that people know where to go. You'd make sure that you've got these big sort of stages with the big attractions, but you also have a general atmosphere that is sort of where continuous little things are happening. So you look at the whole infrastructure for people to have a good time and think, okay, what can we actually bring to King's Cross as an area to change these kind of things? And so from that one frame of basically a metaphor of a music festival, about 30 different directions opened up, and solutions just presented themselves. Generating solutions is not the problem then. It's just getting to that frame. So yes, we've got King's Cross guides now who are actually of the same age as the people that are partying there. Very approachable, non-drinking mostly. And because there's lots of tourists there, and people actually don't know where to go, so people mull around in the street, get in each other's way, and that creates friction. Another thing is temporary signage on the street saying, okay, this is actually the way to the... There is a train station that remains open all night, and it's about a 20-minute walk, 30-minute crawl, I think, but it's downhill. So temporary sign is there, okay, helping people just to sort of navigate that area. And we're opening up laneways with all kinds of sort of a little bit more of a loungy thing, using projections to really change the atmosphere in the laneways at night so that you're not all crammed into that one street, basically getting frustrated and basically really getting bored because you can't get out. So this is how we project on a bench. And we do all these kind of things, and it just livens up the area, and it makes it much more safer, pleasant place to be. So we're using something that used to be defined as a crime problem to open it up and actually to improve public spaces, because that's what we should be about. That's what we should be doing. And as designers, we work by seduction. We can't change people's behavior, but we can actually sort of help people change their own behavior by providing them with things that they really want. This is a different project, very briefly. One of the first clients that came up to me was actually the railways, Railcorp in New South Wales, and they said, well, we've got this problem the problem is we caused it ourselves because after 9/11 we took away all the litter bins from the station because people could put bombs in there. And, but there's more and more little shops around that sell things in greasy papers, and it gets really messy. So we need to do something. We need to get these bins back. And they'd done their homework. That sort of looked at all the bins in the world, more or less. They came up with folders and folders of bins and said, can you help us choose? And then you say, well, and by the way, it should be really safe. You go, yeah. That's a way to really sort of block a situation completely, saying, try to find a bin where you can't put a bomb in. Well, especially in Australia, where there's lots of mining, everybody has dynamite in their back garden, more or less. That's not so easy. So you think, well, that's not the way to approach this problem. But what is actually the problem? Well, the problem is the false alarms, actually, because you close down the whole railway system for 3 hours to make sure that there's actually nothing wrong. And that's a way for terrorism actually to have a real influence on our lives. Not through the things that go off, but through all the scary things that we do to sort of avoid that kind of risk. So we said, okay, let's redefine this problem from, let's try to sort of create a thing where you can't put a bomb in, because you always can. If you can put a can in, you can put a bomb in. But let's find a way of creating a bin that sort of can be cleared very quickly. So this was the original design. It's sort of a half-transparent thing. And you can't look in normally, but there's a little remote control. You can put on a light so you can look through the rubbish if you think that there's something dodgy in there. And if you think there's something really dodgy, you can slide in an X-ray plate in the back of this bin. And they already have a little robot that can do that kind of stuff. And you go from, say, about 3 hours to clear a station to be sure that it's safe, to about 10 minutes. And so these things are installed now, and they're working, and we're selling them all around the world. And so in the last 3.5 years, we've done about 74 projects, all working with this frame creation method, all sort of trying to find new solutions to these old problems. And working for basically the major infrastructure partners around the country. We've done a wonderful project for the Sydney Opera House, but I can't show it yet because we're still presenting it to them. And it's been a fascinating journey. And all these projects work. Most of these projects have been implemented. Starting out sort of, so we've got websites and stuff where you can see many more projects. I mean, I could tell 74 stories, literally, but I'm not allowed to. We're also doing projects in Holland now. We're working with the city of Eindhoven because Eindhoven has a marathon, and which is great. It's a great thing to have. But it turns out to be quite problematic because the marathon, it gets to be a bit of a traffic nightmare. Lots of streets are closed off, and the population doesn't like it that much for that reason. So the sort of the good people of Eindhoven tend to flee the city on that day, which is not exactly the festive atmosphere that you want to have. So they say, well, we have this traffic problem, and we've been trying to solve it. I mean, we sort of very smart in sort of how the marathon route, how it goes. We do publicity campaigns, we do awareness campaigns. We've got a website. We've rationalized the way we close off streets a little bit, and this is how far we can get. And now we're actually mega stuck because people are still very unhappy. And what can you do? And we started looking at the marathon and saying, okay, the problem is actually that this marathon happens to be in Eindhoven, which is a comparatively small city to have a marathon in. But it doesn't connect into the city at all. It could sort of be anywhere. And that's a pity, because you do actually attract a lot of possibly interesting people to Eindhoven. These are sort of based on the data that we got from the marathon. Where do people come from that run in the marathon? I think, hey, wait a minute, that's a nice spread over the whole of Holland and Belgium. And if they'd done some publicity in German, probably from Germany, that's interesting. And who are these people? Well, actually, they tend to be very highly educated, a little bit on the technical side of the spectrum. I think, well, hey, Eindhoven is an industrial town that always needs to attract people to work there. That's an interesting possibility. And with the things that we have now, you can go on Google Street View and actually see where these people live. You can see what kind of houses they have. And you can see, well, these areas in Eindhoven would possibly be interesting for these people to know, because they don't just come alone, they come with their families for a whole day. It gets to be a different kind of value proposition. But what we've actually done is we've extended the problem immensely going through the process. This is the widest we can make it. And from that you can sort of start to filter out, okay, these values make sense, and how can we connect them together? So what do we have in the city actually? What would a marathon of Eindhoven look like? What is specific for Eindhoven that you could express to people that run in a marathon? And what kind of associations, companies, possible stakeholders do we have? And again, it's a much wider problem than solve this little traffic thing for us, please. And then you end up with saying, okay, we can actually sort of, this is more or less how the marathon goes now. And it goes through different areas that could be themed in different ways. You'd have stakeholders that are interested in attracting people. And what you don't have is all of the marathon audience sort of stuck in the middle in the little red bit, which is where they now all are, clogging up the traffic and everything. But you'd spread them out, spread them around the whole route of the marathon, which means that that route becomes much more transparent for other traffic. So yes, we are solving a traffic problem, but we're also looking at it in a much broader way and making it a more interesting thing to have in your city. This is just one of the frames. This is just one of the possibilities. There's many more of them. But it just goes to show sort of, okay, what do we do very well as designers? And we do very many things very well, I guess. But for me, the core of what design thinking should be, or the core of what design can actually do for other people in the world, people in other organizations, all has to do with creating these new approaches to problems. And I think that's what we're really good at. And I think we should articulate that better, articulate that more. I studied designers and came up with this one sort of process of this is how it could be. There's probably other ones too. And let's just get together and discuss and see how we can, if we say that we're important, if we say that we're important for other sort of organizations in the world, how do we articulate that importance and make a strong case about that? Which is what I wanted to say.
Thank you. So, should we start fighting?
Yeah.
Maybe the fight is a little bit about the difference between learning by doing and learning by research. Can you tell us a little bit how you approach that?
Research allows me, learning by doing is sort of what I do as a designer. You experiment, you try out different things. Learning by research allows you to use other people's heads to get to a different kind of knowledge that you yourself probably wouldn't get to so very quickly. But still, I'm really committed to trying things out. I'm not happy with just writing a theoretical book about this is how the world could work without taking the responsibility to try it out. So I was really happy in Australia to get the opportunity to actually do all of these projects. And now it's sort of, okay, I'm confident enough that this actually works. If you do the 9-step process, it's about a 2-hour workshop in its shortest form. And you can do it with relatively sort of novices, designers or non-designers, and things come out. This actually does work. So there is a core that is valuable in here somehow. And it just needs to articulate it now. I actually want to move away a little bit from the area of safety in public spaces, because I think it can be sort of used for care, it can be used for many different areas. But this has been the platform on which I could do these experiments, and it's been very useful.
There is also something you bring up, bringing non-designers to the table as practitioners in the doing process also, right? Yeah. There is tension with that. How do you deal with that tension?
You have to get people on the table that actually feel the problem, in a sense. I mean, if they're not committed, it doesn't work. But if you have a fairly solid process of, okay, let's think about this now, let's think about that now, let's connect these two things. Hey, there's creativity happening in this connection. You can set it up for people to be creative without determining exactly what they're going to be thinking. And designers sort of just do that naturally. This is how designers work. But if you just analyze that a little bit and sort of push it apart a little bit, you can actually see and you can create that kind of tension for people that are not used to think as designers.
So using the tension also between designers and non-designer in the process.
Yeah, definitely.
I know that Lucas wanted to ask you about your PhD.
Yeah. I know, Kees, that you studied a very long time and you have a PhD in design. There's not many people who do that. And then you emigrated to Australia. Yeah. And I'm combining these two facts in one question. How is the design culture in Australia, and how did a PhD change your look at design?
The PhD allowed me to sort of delve deeper into these kind of issues of how do designers think? How does this actually work? Because as a practicing designer, you keep thinking about how you're thinking too. And it just gave me the opportunity and a little bit of money to actually sort of delve into that. The moving to Australia is kind of an interesting one. There was but two big reasons. One big reason was that, okay, I've actually developed these ideas in Holland through the experiments that we've done here with young designers and other people. And this is about change. This is about creating newness in the world, and that's a very cultural thing. And I do want to write a book that does not only work in Holland. So I need to try it out in a different kind of context.
And is Australia as boring as I think?
It's interesting. And Australia is basically in Asia. I've got sort of in the faculty where I work now at the university, I've got more than 50% Southeast Asian students. It's a very dynamic place. And the interesting thing is, I tried to set up these kind of experiments on this scale that I needed in Holland, and I couldn't. Holland has a very strong critical culture, which leads to a very high quality of things that happen. But sometimes if you keep getting criticized from an old perspective, it's very hard to actually do the experiments to start something new. And I basically sort of worked myself into a bit of a corner in Holland, going, okay, I can't get this done. I can't get these experiments done, and I really need them. So what you do now is you go on the web and you stick up your hand and you say, I want to do these experiments, who's interested? And it was a couple of universities from Australia that immediately jumped and said, yeah, we can do that here. And that's actually worked. It's much more of an open experimental culture. And that's an interesting, I mean, you've moved away from Holland too. You become very Dutch when you do that, because you actually have to realize what you can bring to a different culture and what the connections are and what the value is that you create through being in that different environment. And so for me, Australia has worked for this very experimental phase, but I still come back to Holland quite a bit to be criticized, because if I only have to work on self-criticism, it sort of peters out after a while. So, yeah.
Great. So that's a cue for you to criticize him when you see him out of the stage. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.